So we're now joined via Zoom by Professor Gilbert Khadiagala, International Relations at the University of the Witwatersrand, to weigh in on the Africa Peace Mission to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Prof, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Thank you for having me.
Let's look at the overall analysis in relation to the peace mission and the success of the peace mission to date in relation to the sentiments from both countries about this effort.
I think given the skepticism about the initiative from many people, this went very well. It was an Africa determined to go there, present a common and collective position on the ravages of the war on African economies. And they made the point, they pleaded the point that it's important that this war be stopped, and that it's important that the two countries, in fact, take the interests of the larger global community, particularly African countries that have been impacted grievously by the conflict, to begin to explore the opportunities for a peace process. I think that's what I was expecting that the mission would do. I didn't expect that they would go there to negotiate a peaceful settlement, but to open up the opportunities for the two sides to begin to explore a peace process. And I think this was achieved broadly because even though they received a fairly harsh reception in Ukraine, but I think they made their presence, and I think as the ambassador was saying, they went there to appreciate the fact that the war has had an impact on the Ukrainian people. So their presence in places like Bucha was important to demonstrate that Africa was sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause. And then when they went to St. Petersburg, they were received fairly well by Putin, even though he was interrupting some of their statements. But he did appreciate that the Africans were important players in this conflict. He said they are independent, autonomous, and they can potentially bring new voices to the table. So overall, I think this is a good opening salvo into the conflict, into the mediation process. And it's important that we appreciate that Africans can actually lead the way and build on other existing initiatives for a long-run resolution to the process. So I was very impressed by the 10-point plan. The Africans went there very prepared, and I think they started the process very well. And I think we can build on this through subsequent meetings, through subsequent consultations, but also through broadening the African initiative into other initiatives, bringing other actors globally so that we have a peace process going.
Prof, thank you for those sentiments. I wonder if we look at the influence that Africa has in Europe, what was reflected this time round? Also, concerns or appraisals are the missiles that had been launched by a friendly nation to South Africa.
I think African perceptions have always, in Europe, there's a lot of skepticism about the African agency in international affairs, and particularly around this war. A lot of the Europeans, a lot of the Western countries don't believe that Africans can make any difference because they don't believe that African countries have the leverage, and they keep coming to that issue about the leverage of African countries. They don't really have any leverage, but I've insisted from the beginning that African countries have a moral leverage over the parties. So they don't have the muscle,
yes,
the military muscle that can bring the two together, but they have the moral leverage and they have the standing of actors who have been impacted very heavily by the conflict. And that's really important because they can come in as a neutral actor, as a neutral voice among these two belligerents. And then they can begin to jumpstart a process that hopefully can end the conflict. The missile attack on the Kiev, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to touch on the attack as well and perhaps continue the conversation. Do continue.
The missile attack was an unfortunate event because I don't know whether it was due to coordination problems or whether it was Russia trying to demonstrate that even though African countries are in Kiev, they can still continue their attacks. But it was an unfortunate event that actually did overshadow the African initiative somewhat, particularly as it demonstrated to the Ukrainians that the Russians were probably not as serious as they thought they were going to be on receiving the Africans. So I think it was unfortunate, but this was all made up, I think, by the statements that Putin made in St. Petersburg, where he was more conciliatory towards the African approach, where he also said, you know, we are interested in negotiations. And we've been trying to reach out to Ukraine since March 2022. There was an agreement that was signed in 2022. Ukraine refused to sign, but we're interested in peace. Although those are the details that will have to be sorted out later. I'm just mentioning these as I thought Putin was very conciliatory when it came to some aspects of the conflict, even though he still stood very firm about some issues that he doesn't think Russia would give up easily, like the territories that it has already taken from Ukraine. And you know, when the African delegation was in Kiev, one of their first points was that we have to respect the UN principles on territorial integrity and sovereignty, essentially saying to Ukraine, we buy into your position that there can be no negotiations without some measure of Russian acknowledgement that it's the aggressor here. So they were able to do two things. I mean, they were able to speak to Ukrainian concerns, but on the other hand, they were also able to talk to Putin and put their 10-point plan in place on the table and say, maybe can you start looking at this proposal so that you people can end this conflict, which is too bad for Africa. So
Yeah.
I think overall, this was a very interesting initiative, and it has achieved what it could in that moment.
Yeah, and
beyond
obviously,
that, we really don't know.
Prof, we're obviously going to have to look at the different legs to follow in relation to what's unfolding. It cannot be a one-time approach. Very quickly, there was also that incident in Poland, and I wonder if this is going to impact any relations between South Africa and Poland as we speak in relation to the media and the protection personnel.
I think the way to resolve this conflict is just to come clean. I think on the South African side, to say what was it, what are these dangerous goods that they are talking about? Why did they send a delegation, a security personnel of about 100 people? Was it necessary? And I think these are issues that could be resolved through transparency. But on the other hand, I think in the long run, the two sides would have to accept that mistakes probably were made. South Africans made mistakes, probably not revealing what they were carrying on that plane. Maybe the delegation was too big. But Poland will also have to acknowledge that maybe it overreacted, and it shouldn't have been as drastic or as draconian as it was in stopping even journalists from going into Ukraine and Russia. So I think it will be a question of mistakes were made on both sides.
Okay.
So let's forget about it.
Prof. Gilbert Khadiagala, thank you for your time with us here on the SABC International Relations Department at the University of Witwatersrand. Professor Gilbert weighing in, obviously, on the Africa Peace Mission to the Russia-Ukraine conflict.